There's a certain level of confidence that one has to have when you wear this while you're down there singing. You have to have a lot of confidence that that red light means you're not live, or you have confidence that you sing good enough that everyone can hear you. Mine is not the latter of those two. I make sure that red light is on. It is an honor to be here, but I'm not going to be like most people that are full-time preachers and ministers that, they thank everyone for the opportunity. I'm not thanking anybody for being up here. Chase can thank me, or actually I should be aggravated at Philip because Chase called me up and he said, I'm going to be out of town, and Philip said you would like to preach next Sunday. And I think maybe Chase don't know me good enough yet. I said, well, that's just not true. And he said, what? I said, that's not true. And he said, no, Philip said that. I said, right, Philip may have said that, but it's not true that I want to. I said, but if you're in a bind, I'm always willing to help out. So thank you, Philip. It's interesting, too. I'm absolutely certain it's not because of the topic. He said, I want you, if you can, continue with the topic, wisdom. And I was thinking, maybe he just knows I need it more than anyone, so I'll study it a little more. So I stand before you not as an expert witness, but as just a fellow student and someone who needs wisdom probably more than anyone in here. The people that probably have the most wisdom were females, and we weren't going to put them up here. So one of them, Mary Brooke always wants a shout out from the pulpit. When she knew I was preaching, I knew she's got to think, okay, how are you going to put that in? She said, well, what are you preaching on? I said, wisdom. She goes, well, that ought to be easy. So anyway, knowing isn't the same as being wise. In the past, I usually spend a lot of time to make really good PowerPoints and slides, and often I will use that to guide me through my notes or what I plan to talk about. Not the case. I had a really busy week, so you'll just look at this the whole time, and occasionally you can imagine what a cool slide would look like on the topic that I'm talking about. But knowing isn't the same as being wise. Knowledge is information. Wisdom is application. It's the fact that you can know God's will and still live foolishly. We live in what is probably the most knowledge-rich era ever. I think everyone knows more than they've ever known before. You literally, I even toyed with this, but I just thought, no, then some of you will never put it back away. I started to say, everybody take out your phone and see who can tell me, when Marco Polo lived or something. And anybody in this room can probably tell me there's some that could probably do it within 20 seconds, some that, give them 2 minutes and they can find that out. But I grew up in a time, unless I could go home and pull out my little M, which we didn't own because, we only bought like the B. So I knew everything about Belize, Budapest, Belgium, Beethoven, Bach, and Bale, like Alexander Graham. And if it wasn't a B, I read that part, but it was kind of like most things in the 80s. The society had this one source of knowledge. We look at what Encyclopedia Britannica said. You might even go to the card catalog and find a book about it. We watched the same shows. It was like everybody watched Cosby Show on Thursday night because there wasn't anything else. You couldn't stream anything else. It's like you were just spoon-fed. Nowadays, everybody can be experts or feel like they're experts on everything. So it's this knowledge-rich society, yet somehow anxiety, addiction, depression, broken families, broken lives, and spiritual immaturity are still everywhere. Some people might even argue that it's worse than ever. So from that, I would say if knowledge alone made us wise, then wouldn't we have solved all that by now? If knowledge alone took care of that, we seem to have all the knowledge now, or the access. 1 Corinthians 8:1 says, knowledge puffs up. Sometimes knowledge just makes you think you know everything, but unless you apply it, You're not going to be there. So we're going to look at three things today. One, we're going to look at the fact that knowledge is not the same as wisdom. We'll look at biblically, how are the two defined? And then secondly, we're going to look at what is one without the other. Okay, if they're two different things, what is one of them? Like, what if you don't? If you only have knowledge but not wisdom, what dangers are there? And then the third one is, if we conclude you do have to have them both, then where do we get that? So first of all, knowledge, defining them biblically. Let's look at knowledge first. Knowledge is facts, it's knowing the truth, and it's understanding. It's necessary, but it's incomplete. You've got to have a foundation of knowledge. That's what we do in kindergarten, first and second grade. That's what we do in school, is we get a foundation of knowledge. The Bible talks about studying the scriptures. We're expected to have this foundation of knowledge, but it's incomplete. I always think about how, as an educator, it's like there's numeracy. And I'm thinking, I don't know. Sam Marks, maybe he can count to 10. I don't know. Can he? Okay, good. Jonathan gives me a shrug. Catherine says he can. I don't want to call him out. Call out your grandchild's deficiencies from everybody. But around those age, you can count to 10, but if I say, hand me 4 apples, probably couldn't do that. Like I can count to 10, but I don't understand the application of those numbers yet. It's just really something you say. We've got people who actually can memorize an algebraic formula, but they can't solve the equation. Or I remember as a 14-year-old, you can study for your permit test and you can learn all the rules of the road and you know what all the signs mean, but until you've been behind the wheel of a car, you can pass that paper test. You can have the knowledge about driving, but until you've been behind the wheel and done it, you're not going to be an effective driver. I won't even go down the road of Annie trying to learn, which Annie turned 25 yesterday, and y'all know Annie. She gave me a pair of socks with her face all over them. I couldn't find them or I'd have worn them, but I did wear my New York socks because that's where she is. And I know most of you are thinking, that's amazing. How can someone as young as Tony Willis have a 25-year-old? But yes, fathered her when I was 10. So I also think about things like a recipe. I mean, you can take the facts, and I could take a recipe, and I could follow that recipe. Brenda Gant could follow that recipe, and most of y'all are going to say, they taste very different. Someone did a better job than the other simply because the information is there, but wisdom to carry it through. So Proverbs 1:7, this is where you can pretend the cool little slides up there. Proverbs 1:7 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Interesting, because we had an entire sermon last week on the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That's also in Proverbs. We're going to come back to that, so just pin that one up. We'll come back and we'll compare those two. But it also says in Romans 10:2, they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. So what does that mean? You have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. It sounds like it's possible to be all fired up, but going the wrong way, not doing it the way God wants. So you have to have that knowledge of what does he want? Because you could argue that there may be entire groups of people. There's actually a lot of terrorist groups that will claim it's in the name of God. They're fired up and they're very zealous about doing God's work, but maybe they're missing the actual foundation knowledge of what God's work would be. Albert Einstein, he was brilliant. Most people think of him and have him as synonymous with knowledge and intellect. He's widely considered one of the smartest people that ever lived. His work reshaped modern physics, and it almost has become where you can just say that. You can say, well, he's no Einstein, or if you call someone Einstein, you say, well, thanks, Einstein. People know that means you've got a lot of knowledge. There's high intellect there. But what about wisdom? How is wisdom different? Knowing the truth versus living truth. It's information versus application. Wisdom is discernment. It's God-honoring application. It's obedient action at the right time. Knowledge tells you what God says. Wisdom decides whether you're going to obey it. You know, every doctor, in reality, probably every person at this point could agree that there are certain things like drugs or smoking is bad for you. Every driver knows that texting and driving is dangerous. Every Christian would know that prayer actually matters. I think we all could even agree that eating donuts is probably not healthy. So if medical knowledge doesn't actually produce healthy living, then biblical knowledge doesn't automatically produce faithful living. The question is never what we know, but the question is whether we live wisely. So sometimes there's two things that go hand in hand. People say old and wise together. And some of that is because of trial and error. There are some people who are actually wise beyond their years. You hear that phrase too. The person who's wise beyond their years, my theory is that those people are the ones who can learn it from other people's mistakes. They watched other people and their lives, and they think, well, I don't want to go down that road, so they're wise beyond their years. Then there's the trial and error people that they don't learn it unless they go through it. And that's why it takes them years to become wise, because they have to make the mistakes themselves. Yes, everybody else showed me that was a bad idea, but I think I'll be different. And then they go, nope, it was a bad idea. I learned it the hard way, and then they become wiser. So sometimes experience can help us with wisdom. You know, in reality, probably everything that I've just told you on point number 1 about the difference in the two is we know it. I don't know that I've said anything you didn't already know, but that's really the point, is we know things, but what do we do about it? What are we actually doing about it? So the second point is knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. So we've established they're different. So the second point is, okay, what's the dangers of having one without the other? In Matthew 23, these, if you've got one of those old Bibles, these are red letters. The Pharisees, Jesus is saying that they knew the scriptures inside and out. They had knowledge. But without wisdom to understand God's heart, their knowledge became prideful and judgmental. Led a lot of people astray. They had knowledge without wisdom. It's kind of like having a car with a full tank of gas, but no brakes. A whole lot of power, there's a lot of potential, but it's also very, very dangerous. In fact, Satan used this to his advantage. He used it to tempt. When he tempted Jesus after Jesus had been fasting, if you think about it, all 3 temptations were scripture-based. They're just out of context or not really in the right way that they were supposed to be used. Sometimes people even use that in their own lives. They know the rules. They say something, hey, we're supposed to tell the truth, and they use it as an excuse to gossip. Or they say, hey, I'm not really gossiping. I'm just telling the truth. I'm just telling them what happened. Some things can be true, but that don't mean you want to spread it or you don't need to share it. And there's some things that if you just take them, wisdom says, all right, just because that's what it says, that's not truly what it means. For example, Proverbs 21:9, It's better to live on a corner of the roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife. So I'm supposed to sleep on the roof at night if I feel like things aren't going good? Proverbs 27:14, whoever loudly blesses his neighbor early in the morning will be counted as cursing him. So if you think that through, whoever loudly blesses his neighbor early in the morning will be counted as cursing him. Why would that be? You're blessing him. We're supposed to bless people. We're supposed to do blessings. But the wise says, but nobody wants that with a megaphone in their ear at 4 a.m. Even if it's good things, you really don't want it loud early in the morning. Earlier we said wisdom comes with age, but unfortunately not always. Just because someone's old does not mean they're automatically wise. Some people just simply make the same mistakes over and over and over. Actually, I texted Walker yesterday. I was going to let him read his favorite verse. We actually, those of you that know us, sometimes I feel like our life is a parody at the Willis home. And so when Duke, our dog, died, who was the brother of Daisy and Duke were the two dogs. But when Duke died, Duke was like the neighborhood, I don't know. People tried to kill him multiple times. He went missing for months on end, and we got a phone call, and someone found him in a ditch out in Cloverdale. That's not anywhere close to St. Florine. There was a dog in a bag in a ditch. It was Duke. He survived. Then another time we found someone else done something, So it was a long story with Duke. So when Duke died, we actually had a funeral in the backyard, and everybody wore their black. I remember Hope Clark came. I remember Kyle Butt came. He was my neighbor. He came over and he said a few words because he really liked Duke. And Walker read his famous verse, as a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly. Ask him if he'd just stand and say it. But it came up here. Some people just keep making the same mistakes, and that's what that proverb is saying. As a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly. Matthew 7:26 says, a foolish man heard Jesus' words, but didn't do them. Foolish man heard Jesus' words. So if you hear them, you probably have the knowledge. You know what he said to do, but the foolish man does not do them. The key point here is you can sit in this congregation. You can sit here in this pew every Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night, still build your house on the sand. Very possible. So our first one is the two aren't the same. The second one is it's dangerous, called out for being foolish if you don't develop wisdom. And then the third point is going to be, well, then if we have to get wisdom, how do I get it? We had the scripture reading from James 1:5 saying, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God. I know the adult class, I talked about this a little bit last week, but I realize everyone in here is not in that, so I'll give you a quick. I mentioned Kyle. Kyle used to be my next door neighbor, and as we're mowing our yards, we'd always pass each other. And been around Kyle a lot. He likes to just stop and just, we'd have these long, it took an extra hour to mow my yard because he always wanted to stop and talk about something. So he stops me one time and he said, do you want to be wise? I said, yeah. Did you pray about it this morning? I said, well, I didn't. He goes, not believe in God? I do believe in God. But he said, well, you know what James 1:5 says? And you can tell he's just been thinking. It's not that he's condemning me. Maybe he was, but he is really just saying, something that's on his heart. He says, well, James 1:5 says if we want wisdom, then we would ask him and he will give it to us. So if you want it, then why aren't we asking him for it? So I challenged the adult class last week to pray for wisdom this week. Hope that you did. I won't make you stand up. But I will say that if we're doing points like service groups, that I do think that would be worthy of points for my team. And we got some more points this morning, I think, because I know Jeff and Kathy, Steve, with several people, we were kind of in charge of greeting. Some of them were here earlier than I've ever seen them. So that was good. I did see Mary was here early, but she's not on my team. I think that was just because she was excited about hearing her name. She actually did tell me, she said if she's going to be a preacher's daughter, she's got to be here early. So Proverbs 9:10 is back to what we heard last week. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So in chapter 1, it said it's the beginning of knowledge, and then in chapter 9, it says it's the beginning of wisdom. And I think obviously both are true, but if you really study Proverbs, you'll see a difference in how these are broken down. The first 8 chapters are all instructional, teaching. It's like you have to teach things, you have to hear the word, you have to hear the instruction, and everything is about pursuing this understanding and developing a knowledge base. Chapter 9 is a hinge in the book of Proverbs because the rest of Proverbs is how to apply that to your life. How do you let it help you make good choices? Things like the wise in heart accept commands, but a chattering fool comes to ruin. That's chapter 10. Chapter 12, the way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. That's in chapter 12. Chapter 13 says, a wise son heeds his father's instruction, but a mocker does not respond to rebukes. So that hinge point is saying, all right, in the beginning, you've got this fear of God that drives you to knowledge. Just learning the facts. It's been said that that Proverbs 1:7 is what gets you through school. In reality, that's all school is. You're learning a bunch of facts. You're learning the foundation. But as someone that we frequently hire brand new teachers, and I always remember this person who'd graduated with a 4.0, top of the class, and I asked her in the interview, I said, what does that tell me about you? She said, that tells you nothing about my ability to be a good teacher. It just means I can learn things. And I hope to learn to be a good teacher. I hired her. I was concerned that you think because you had a 4.0 in college that you think you're a great teacher. She didn't. She knew I just have the knowledge. Now I want to go learn. So Proverbs 1:7 just gets you through school. But this Proverbs 9:10, 9:14, that gets you through life. The knowledge can get you through school, but the wisdom is what gets you through life. Knowledge asks, what is right? And wisdom asks, will I obey? Knowledge fills the head, but wisdom shapes the heart. Knowledge sometimes is what impresses people, but wisdom is what pleases God. The Titanic was the world's most advanced ship. When you think about for 1912, the way it was designed, it was the smartest, the most intelligent engineers in the world. Watertight compartments, advanced navigation, cutting-edge materials. Experts said practically unsinkable. The knowledge was exceptional. But with a lack of wisdom, despite that knowledge, the ship only carried lifeboats for half the passengers. The ice warnings were ignored or minimized at best. The ship maintained full speed through iceberg territory. Confidence replaced caution. They knew the risks. They just chose to not act wisely. And as a result, 1,500 lives were lost. Not because of ignorance. Not because they were shocked. We had no idea there might be icebergs up there. We had no idea that something made of steel was capable of sinking, but because of that unapplied knowledge. They knew how to build a ship. They just didn't know how to sell it wisely. Or maybe you could say knowledge built the Titanic. Wisdom would have slowed it down a little bit. Proverbs 16:18 says, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. The Bible warns about people that get so much learning that they think they know better than God. Matthew 7:26, a foolish man builds his house on the sand. Earlier we equated Einstein to that genius, that knowledge of intelligence. Part you might not know is that Einstein struggled deeply in personal relationships. I'm not being judgmental. This is from his own notes. He admitted to being emotionally distant from his wife, from his children. His first marriage ended painfully. His children suffered from neglect. And in a letter to his son, he said he regretted how he had lived his life. He was famously disorganized, struggled with marriage and finances. It simply shows that knowledge doesn't equal wisdom in daily living. A man can understand the laws of nature, but fail to follow the laws of God. James 3:13 says, "Who is wise among you? Let him show it by his conduct." Romans 2:21 says, "And then who teach others, you should teach yourself. They do not practice what they preach," in reference to the Pharisees. James 1:22 says to be doers of the word and not hearers only. We want to be wise, James 1:5 says, then we've got to pray to God and ask for it, and He will give it to us. So knowledge does not equal wisdom. Knowledge is knowing, wisdom is doing. Knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. And then finally, where does it come from? Well, it comes from God. You know, it's interesting, though. We already know what to do. We know what to do, but sometimes the self-awareness of are we doing it? You know, I looked at what Clay said. When Clay was doing the communion, it was something, a thought came to me when he was reading that from Genesis that I had not realized before. God said, "Where are you?" And I've definitely thought before, God knew where they were. But just like, you know, AA, that first step is you have to admit there's a problem. Maybe God needed them to, do you know where you are? God knew where they were, but He needed them to have the self-awareness of, do you know where you are? Same's true for us. God is not calling us to learn more as much as He's calling us to just do what we already know to do. Be wise. James 4:17 says, "To him that knoweth to do good, doeth it not, him it is sin." Maybe you know you should be more involved. Maybe you know you should be more active in your prayer life. Probably know that you should be here and you should stay in class and you should be here on Wednesday night. And maybe you should know, that you should help more and cook meals more and visit more and send cards more. And maybe you should invite your coworker and have religious conversations. You know all of this stuff. But the most dangerous distance in Christianity is the distance between what we know, what we live. That's a dangerous gap. If there's anything that you need to do that we can help you with, you want to publicly get the support of the people here, we'll be glad to help you. Anyway, let's close the gap between what we know and what we live and try to live wisely. Please do so as we stand and as we
just as I am without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb of God.